Welcome to the spooky world of online Japanese entertainment localization Discourse. On this hallowed week, Youmacon announced a panel, The Unsung Heroes of Black and White, How to Scanlate and Translate Manga. Many of my peers in the professional localization industry were upset by this panel, saying it's wrong to encourage illegal translations and piracy, and they were subsequently dogpiled by fans who had differing opinions. Now, for you normies out there, scanlations are fan-made translations of manga where one or more fans scan in the manga and add their own translation into the speech bubbles. They then usually share their scanlations far and wide on websites, Discord servers, private chats, etc. Scanlations fall into the broader practice of fan translations, including fan-translated anime, fan subs, and fan-translated games and light novels. Now, back in my day, fan-translated Japanese entertainment was really the only way for most fans to access the anime and manga that they were interested in. There simply weren't commercial releases of most anime and manga series, and the official releases that did exist were very expensive. Like, you sometimes had to shell out $30 for a VHS of 2 to 4 episodes of anime on it, which would slowly degrade over time. And this was in 90s money too, mind you. That's like 55 in today's dollars. With fan subs, on the other hand, you could get 12 episodes of anime for the cost of 3 blank VHS tapes, plus shipping and handling. And when the internet got bigger and slightly less painfully slow, you could get scanlations of manga and fan-subbed episodes of anime and IRC channels, or broken up into 5-minute segments on YouTube for the low price of your mom's internet connection. But now, streaming sites like Crunchyroll, Funimation, Netflix, and others offer just about all the current season's anime simulcast for the low price of free with ads, or for like $10 per month if you don't want ads. And to this day, I'm still astounded by this fact, and even more astounded by the fact that to many younger fans, this is normal. Thanks to sites like Bookwalker and apps like Shonen Jump and even Crunchyroll, you can read a lot of professionally translated and lettered manga legally, for free, or for a modest subscription or digital download fee. Or if you're more old school like me, you can walk into most bookstores and libraries and get hard copies of manga there. Legal, professionally localized Japanese entertainment is not only abundant, but affordable and mainstream. So you'd think that the humble days of fan subbing would be behind us now. But they're not. It was probably pretty obvious from the title of this video. So occasionally, discourse will arise. Which is better, pro translations or fan translations? Is fan translating illegal? Is it a legal gray area? Are fan translations hurting commercial releases? Are they helping? And whenever this discourse rears its ugly head in otaku spaces, it's inevitably reduced into 2 basic straw man positions. Ungrateful, untalented, and cheap fan translators bad for robbing noble, talented professionals. Old, bitter, out-of-touch pro translators bad for insinuating that fan translators are bad, when in fact it is the pro translators that are bad, something jelly donut. And I don't like this us versus them framing, as it's missing a fact that's kind of like really relevant to the discourse. See, let me let you in on a little secret about us folks in the professional localization industry. A terrifying truth about us. We are fans. We are such big fans of Japanese entertainment that we learn Japanese, the art of translation, graphic design, art, and lettering. We're such big fans that we took risks and put ourselves out there to break into the industry. We're such big fans that we stayed in this industry despite being uncredited and underpaid. Just this month alone, I only made like $700 translating. Support me on Patreon, whee! We're such big fans that we spend hours a day not only consuming, but creating anime, manga, games, light novels. And cats mewing off camera.
Miney, you want to be in the video? I'm gonna put you in it, except you're gonna scream if I try to.
Pro translators are fan translators. These 2 terms are not mutually exclusive. It's really more correct to call the 2 groups pro translators and amateur translators. And this is not to say that all amateur translators are bad. Many pro translators started out as amateur translators. Hell, I did! I hosted many of my own scanlations, light novel translations, and manga transcripts on my website for most of the aughts.
And this is a prime example of why manga letterers are important. Like, look at the BAM that I just, like, clearly drew in with the paintbrush tool. And, like, I used Comic Sans and all the letters are going outside the bubbles. Like, wow, top quality.
Many fan translators do have an extensive knowledge of Japanese as well as years of experience translating it. And sometimes pro translators do mess up from time to time. We are only human. I'm not trying to gatekeep translating here. Anyone is welcome to try it. It's really not the creators of fan-translated content that I have an issue with. It's the consumers. And I sense those comments you're about to type, good sirs, so let's just all calm down, have a nice cup of tea, and listen to what I have to say first. This is a nuanced topic, and I actually agree with the defenders of fan translations on many of their premises. I just disagree with most of their conclusions. I'm going to paraphrase most of the key arguments I've seen in favor of amateur translations and go over where I agree and where I disagree. And maybe we can all learn a little something, and then this discourse won't be as spooky anymore. では行きましょうか.
What about the series that aren't commercially available in English? How else am I supposed to consume them?
Yes, there is sadly still a lot of manga, anime, games, and light novels out there that have yet to be commercially released in English. Older titles especially. One of my favorite manga series, in fact, falls into this camp. And indeed, fan translations of these unreleased titles could spur interest in them and lead to their English-translated commercial releases in the future. Many of my peers... Whoop. Am I making fuzzy noises with my microphone? I hope that's okay. I can just say it's a poltergeist. Many of my peers in the localization industry would rebut, doesn't matter, it's still illegal to share amateur translations of these things online. And I'd agree with that. Technically, I mean, sales-wise, I don't really think fans are doing Shogakukan or Shueisha any financial harm by pirating works which they really would not have bought in Japanese in the first place. However, amateur translators could do the Japanese creators potential artistic harm by translating their works without their permission. Miyuchi Suzue, for example, has said that she doesn't want her Glass Mask series to be translated by amateurs, and I remember Clamp explicitly forbidding fans from scanning in their art and sharing it online. When works are professionally localized, the Japanese creators of a property will usually have a bit of a say in how it's handled. Sometimes there's even some back and forth communication. You don't see that with amateurs because they aren't given access.
But some manga artists have explicitly thanked fans for their scanlations.
Yeah, sometimes a manga artist might not care, or... I don't want my hair in my microphone. Yeah, sometimes a manga artist might not care, or in fact would welcome fan translations of their work. That doesn't mean all of them do, and it certainly doesn't give amateurs free rein to scanlate any manga they want. For every anecdotal example of a grateful mangaka, there's a counterexample of a mangaka who was upset that their work was translated without their permission. Look, I understand what it feels like. When I translated manga, light novels, and anime as an amateur, I saw myself as an unsung hero, bringing series to the English-speaking audiences and sharing the love. I always imagined that I was making the creators happy by sharing their works with the world. And maybe those creators were happy and I just never heard from them. Or maybe they were unhappy and I just never heard from them.
But fans translate better than pros anyway.
Are we really doing this? Like, oh, the fuck am I kidding? Of course we are, okay. A lot of this pro-translation bad rhetoric comes from bad faith actors who don't actually understand Japanese or translation theory. They just don't like the way one or two lines of dialogue were worded in this one anime once, and the narrative kind of took off from there. And I'm not going to spend the next few hours debunking these bad faith claims because A, no one's going to click on a 5-hour video, and B, I already made a lot of videos addressing this, from Dragon Maid to Agretsuko to Kageki Shoujo to subs versus dubs and JoJo, and I also have a whole second channel devoted to teaching Japanese, both through textbooks and through anime, so go check out those videos if you want to learn more about the translation process. Not all criticisms of pro-translations are invalid, though. I mean, we are human, and pro-translators do make mistakes sometimes, as do amateur translators. And I won't hesitate to call out a bad professional translation when I see one out in the wild.
とりあえず誰をエスコートするかだな。はいはい。お前はアキラちゃんだろ。まあね。ああ、無性に腹立つ。
Mushoni is not non-sexual. It's more like overwhelmingly or in excess. Like, how do you make a mistake like that? I mean, this was translated almost 20 years ago, and the industry has come a long way since then, but Jesus fuck.
As I acknowledged earlier, some amateur translators are very good. In fact, they could and should turn pro. But the screening process for amateur translators is not as strict as it is for pro translators. And the translations aren't sent back to the Japanese studio for approval from their in-house translators either. So while some amateur translators are professional tier, many of them are not. And how are you, a fan who does not necessarily understand Japanese, going to be able to tell the difference? It's like getting a nose job. Sure, there's probably 1 or 2 really good plastic surgeons out there with hardly any experience, but do you really want to roll those dice?
Would I want to get that nose job from a robot, though? Some manga companies are cutting corners and using machine translation, and it's terrible.
I agree. Machine translation is a huge threat to the industry. A far bigger threat than out-of-touch, elder millennial woke translators like me, for sure. I just don't think that amateur translations and piracy are the answer. All fans, both outside the industry and within, need to speak up and demand human translators. And while we're at it, demand stable, high-paying salaries for them. And while we're at it, where's my red beret? Demand from our politicians that our economic system work for we the people and not the mega rich. I mean, automation is happening everywhere. The only reason these companies are using machine translations in the first place is so they can maximize profits like the good little capitalists that they are, so that they can reap in all the benefits while the translators get slammed with workload and pay cuts and have to take on side jobs and resort to fucking YouTubing part-time in a vain attempt to get a leg up while their rent just keeps increasing and they have to pay like $400 per month to not see a doctor because they can't afford the copay, and their meals get plainer and plainer. I mean, I'm a good cook and all, but there's only so many ways you can cook rice and beans, potatoes before you go absolutely fuck. Anyway, I agree that machine translations suck. Maybe let's work together and pressure the companies to hire real humans to do the work, instead of throw our hands up in the air and go back to illegal scans.
Well, I want a good translation of my favorite series by a fan who actually cares about it.
Yes, not all pro translators are super fans of all the titles they translate. We can't all love our projects as much as Katrina Leonidakis loves Kageki Shoujo. But, my dudes, the same is true of amateur translators. Back in my fan-subbing days, I translated plenty of titles that I wasn't super wild about, and I highly doubt that every amateur translator out there is a super fan of everything they touch. I still liked the series that I translated, and I put my best effort into them because I felt that the fans deserved it. And I still apply this principle to my projects today. We all do. We do care. Of course we care. We have to care. Otherwise we'll half-ass it and we won't get hired again. Or if we really didn't care and this was all just a job to us, we'd have quit long ago from the demoralizing long hours, low pay, and occasional abuse from fans. Support me on Patreon! Yes, sometimes a pro translator is not going to translate your favorite character how you think they should talk. Sometimes a pro translator is going to use spooky words like cringe or sus or cultural appropriation. But do you honestly think that amateur translations are infallible? That they're on the exact same wavelength as you and will therefore translate anime exactly the way that you like? What about all the other fans who interpret your favorite character differently? What about all the other fans who actually like words like cringe, sus, and cultural appropriation? Translators, be they pro or amateur, are translating for wide audiences, not just you. They're approaching the series from their own perspective, not yours. So of course you're not going to love 100% of everything they translate. They aren't you. Now, don't get me wrong, I do see the value in having multiple translations of something. Back in the glory days of fan subbing, we all had our favorite anime fan sub groups, and sometimes if there was an anime we were particularly excited about, we'd wait for our favorite group to release it first. Or maybe we would watch the same anime translated by 3 different groups so we could get even deeper insight into what all the characters were saying. In an ideal world, we'd have multiple companies, each with their own good, unique English localizations. But we're just not there yet.
But most of the fan translations are of unlicensed stuff, so they aren't actually hurting the industry.
Okay, let's not kid ourselves here. There are plenty of amateur English fan subs and scanlations of anime and manga that are licensed in English. It's bad enough that some fans are uploading copies of Funimation and Crunchyroll subs directly to YouTube and other places just hours after they're streamed. It's a whole other level to upload a version with an amateur localization when a professional one already exists and is easily accessible.
Accessible? What about people who live in locked regions? Sometimes shows just aren't available to stream in other countries.
Yeah, that does suck, and I do hope that the big streaming sites remedy that soon. In the meantime, you might be able to bypass that with a VPN.
And this is where if I were a bigger channel, I'd segue into a commercial for a VPN, but I guess I'll make do with the $2 of AdSense revenue that I might eventually earn from this video. Support me on Patreon!
There are many shows I want to watch, books I want to read that I either can't afford or don't have access to. Want to know how I deal with it? I watch something else. I read something else. It sucks not having access to all the entertainment you want. I've been wanting to read Lindsay Ellis's new books for quite a while now, and I can't because I'm running out of money. Welcome to life.
But I can't afford to buy the official English language release. If I didn't read the scanlations, Shonen Jump wouldn't have gotten a dime from me anyway.
Okay, piracy is somewhat inevitable because poverty, and whomst among us has not torrented a TV show, or signed up for a month-long free trial 5 times with 5 different credit cards, or used our friend's Netflix password, or downloaded music from Napster, or LimeWire, or recorded songs off the radio with our cassette player. Yep, I'm old. But let's be real, it's still illegal. And as someone who works in the anime industry, I feel obligated to discourage the piracy of it. I wish we all had more money to spend on things we love instead of basic survival needs. But if you care about the anime and manga industry and the super fans who work on it, maybe don't make piracy your default?
Well, what about people whose first language isn't English? What about scanlations and fan subs in other languages?
Well, Japanese to English translating is what I do, so it's what I'm going to talk about. But just about everything I've said can be applied to the pro and amateur localization of Japanese entertainment into non-English languages too. And yes, in an ideal world, Japanese entertainment would be translated into every language, so people whose native language is not English wouldn't have to rely on English language releases of Japanese entertainment in order to understand and enjoy it. The popularity of Japanese entertainment is indeed continuing to spread in my country and worldwide. I remember back when manga was still a fairly fringe sort of hobby in the US, it was actually pretty mainstream in China. And I was so jealous of my Chinese American friends who got to watch all the anime and read all the manga in Mandarin. Meanwhile, I was struggling with my Japanese language Ayashi no Seres manga with a Japanese to English dictionary in one hand and a year's worth of high school Japanese in the other, like desperately trying to decipher anything in here and hoping that maybe, eventually, it might be translated into English someday. Funnily enough, by the time it was, I'd already learned Japanese and translated some of it on my Angel Fire website.
But without scanlations and fan subs, your job wouldn't even exist today. You should thank us.
Yes, I agree. Hey, Sarah from the past. Yeah, Sarah? Thank you for all your hard work, dedication, and love you put into your scanlations, fan subs, and light novel translations 20 years ago. Aw, shucks, I'm glad I could help build the industry. Oh, you did? Back when anime and manga were still very niche, unpopular, and hard to come by in English, you were a lifeline to English-speaking fans everywhere. That's awesome! I'm glad I could help make anime and manga so popular and ubiquitous. My work here is done! Yes, indeed it is. Bye!
Snark aside, yes, amateur translators walked so that pro translators could run. And without the diligent hard work and passion of fans of the 80s and aughts, manga and anime probably wouldn't be as popular as they are today. But, just like the Pokemon, we've evolved. Wow, did I really write that bad joke? So, are all fan translations bad? No. But this is a nuanced issue with so many factors at play. The history of anime and manga fandom outside of Japan, philosophy and ethics, copyright and fair use laws, how corporations work, how artists have been historically hurt when it comes to recognition and pay, the increasing gap between rich and poor, not to mention how language and translation theory work. But if there's one thing you take away from this video, I want it to be this. We are all fan translators.
So I made this Soy from Fushigi Yugi costume actually for Halloween, and my friend at the time went as Tomo. This was like 25 years ago now, and my boobs have kind of grown a little bit since I made it, so I can't clasp it anymore, but you kind of get the idea. And we wore these costumes to Anime Expo 98, I believe, where Watase Yu was a guest of honor, and she wrote about Anime Expo and about us specifically in the Free Talk of Volume 8 of Ayashi no Ceres. And when this came out, I actually was not fluent in Japanese yet. I was still learning it, but I remember I went to Kinokuniya in San Jose, and as soon as I bought this, I tore it out of the shrink wrap and sat on the floor, literally the floor, and turned immediately to the back because I heard that she'd written about AX and that there was a comment about me in here. And I was like, oh my god, what did the Holy One have to say about me? So here's my amateur translation from over 20 years ago of this Free Talk. Arrow to Soy, this is where she talks about me. She really has the same body type as Soy in the manga. Her legs are so long. She's an American, no mistaking it. Oh yeah, Sasuga Gaijin. Yeah, I don't know if I would have translated that as she's an American, no mistaking it today. Sasuga is one of those things that's kind of hard to translate. I think I probably would have gone with more like Americans, am I right? Or Gaijin, am I right? Or that's a Gaijin for ya. Something kind of more like that. I remember another fan at the time, when I translated this for fan groups, someone was when I'm like, oh, she said that my legs are long, this other fan was like, really? Because my friend who knows Japanese said, oh my, what big feet she has. No, ashinagai means long legs, it does not mean big feet. I have very dainty little feet, which I sometimes accidentally share on Twitter sometimes when I post pictures of my cats and my feet happen to be in them, and then I feel like, oh dang, missed opportunity, I should have asked for money.